My X account has been restricted, and I'm not completely sure as to why. For about 2 weeks, it was completely suspended. And during this time, I was unable to view my old posts or engage with the website at all. I appealed the suspension, as I didn't want to lose several years' worth of work, and was mechanically denied. But several days later, my account was reinstated with no explanation from the moderation team at all. However, at this time my content appears to be viewable only to those that have registered with the website. In other words, it's still restricted. The offending content was a reply to a post made by the FBI celebrating the anniversary of the arrest of Ted Kaczynski. I felt obligated to attempt to call attention to the fact that Kaczynski was the subject of psychological experimentation at the hands of one of his professors. This is Henry A. Murray. Murray was a psychologist at Harvard University that conducted psychologically damaging experiments on his students. And one of those students was Kaczynski himself. I'm not sure if the goal of my suspension was to censor me or what. But as far as I can tell, I didn't actually break any of the website's rules. And honestly, I didn't think that this post was all that controversial when I initially made it. After all, this angle tends to come up in the media that has been created about Kaczynski's life. To be clear, I don't agree with what Kaczynski did. And I don't find the writings that he left behind to be particularly intriguing either. But his case is relevant to my interests because psychological experimentation on civilians by those in authority is something that I find highly concerning. Especially if this is what results from it. The National Institute of Mental Health has a secret. And that secret is that the rats are an analogy for people. Mr. Kaczynski was one of the rats of NIM. And thanks to advances in the fields of surveillance and propaganda, tending cage has never been easier than it is today. So basically, when we see modern acts of similar violence, we could very well be looking at reruns of the Kaczynski incident. Websites like 4chan have a reputation for creating spree killers. And if you look at the propaganda that radicalizes them, it is often alarmingly professional. I do graphic design myself. And although I've been at it for a while now, some of this material is still beyond my ability level. In other words, I don't think at least some of this stuff is being made by the standard user base. So that begs the question, where is the propaganda actually coming from? I have no idea why you would want to radicalize spree killers and terrorists unless you were waging a sort of cold civil war against the general public. But my personal theory is that if the inner circle of contemporary psychology bears any resemblance at all to the somewhat archaic practice of alchemy, and I'm pretty sure that it does, then its ultimate ambition is to impart the more cryptic elements of its education on an institutional outsider that hasn't been subjected to its oaths. Kaczynski himself was privately experimenting with both cryptography and symbolism, which is a hallmark of other violent criminals with a similar MO. And violence withstanding, there is nothing particularly modern about any of this, as you can find similar cryptograms in many old religious and alchemical manuscripts. And relatively contemporary Masonic literature tends to feature this sort of material as well. So this is all at least tangentially related to my own research, as the restricted account in question is focused on symbolic studies. Specifically, symbolic pattern recognition is a substitute for conventional language. These patterns objectively exist, and the evidence for them is absolutely overwhelming. Really, there is in fact so much to work with that I can barely keep up with it all. I believe that I have discovered something substantial hidden within the Western artistic pantheon, and I don't need the approval of others to know this. A great number of people throughout history have apparently been subject to oaths of secrecy regarding the true intentions of church and state, and this puts extreme limitations on their capacity for verbal and written expression. This means that our leadership does not have true freedom of speech. Therefore, one of the primary goals of the American government has yet to be actualized. And yes, this goes far beyond classified information as you currently understand it. However, it was realized long ago that these prohibitions could be subverted through iconography alone. Whether this is generally being done to undermine the system, or simply provide a visual blueprint for their peers is up for debate, and most likely varies from individual to individual and era to era. But the fact of the matter is that the symbolic record betrays many things that written history keeps concealed. And the implications of this material are often highly alarming. This pattern of behavior deeply penetrates historical iconography, and it is still being done to this very day. Prominent examples of this can be found in the works of modern authors such as Stephen King, whose bibliography surprisingly appears to be full of veiled biblical references. These works are illuminated. And the nature of iconographic illumination is that if you remove the iconography from its textual binding, a second narrative emerges. To give a biblical example, removing illustrations of the Nativity from their mythological foundation often leaves us with imagery that seems to invoke questionable paternity. And this would have been inferred by the church to apply to common women in general. Note the presence of multiple different men idling around in the background. And no, these aren't the three kings, as there's only two of them. In another example of the very same, it appears that this young mother has potential suitors lined up around the block. It is worth noting that this is a word game in addition to a symbolic one. As with all of this in mind, the similarities between the words nativity and naivety would not be lost on those initiated into inner Christianity. Especially concerning Joseph, who is a stand-in for the common man as well. This is the true nature of the illuminated manuscripts of the Middle Ages. And this isn't just speculation either. These books will often directly invite the reader to examine their minor details. And despite their age, these traditions have survived into the modern era. Contemporary examples of this can be prominently found in art related to King's Dark Tower series. Some of these illustrations appear to allude to Masonic concepts as well as Christian ones. And there are a few references to alchemy thrown in for good measure as well. This sort of symbolism permeates King's entire catalog to varying degrees. The novels themselves aren't completely devoid of what one might call meta information. The Dark Tower 7 even directly names the Fraternal Order system, but for the most part they are exactly what they appear to be. A form of light entertainment that has been written for a general audience. Their illuminating aspects are primarily hidden within the artwork and book titles. And this is an interesting strategy because for every person that actually reads one of these stories, there will be many more that have simply heard of them. Either by seeing them sitting on a shelf somewhere or through their licensing to television and the film industry. This sows terms like under the dome into the public discourse. And just to be clear, this isn't a reference to the flat earth conspiracy theory. The general public is inside of what can only be called an information quarantine regarding certain aspects of religion and governance. And this very concept has been previously explored in religious artwork. And yes, I am certain that this is what he is actually going for. I recently found a book from an obscure children's property from the 80s called Sector's Warriors of Symbion that contains a 1-to-1 of the Masonic Royal Arch Cipher, which is a cryptogram that is featured in a few different lodge monitors. And these alphabets are exactly the same. Exactly the same. There's no ambiguity here. So as far as I'm concerned, this is a smoking gun as to proof that people within the publishing industry are actually doing this sort of thing. And yeah, that's Symbion as in symbolism. The Dark Tower itself seems to invoke the biblical Tower of Babel, which is, of course, a construct of language. And that is exactly what all of this appears to be. What this sort of symbolism ultimately represents is an intricate topic that deserves its own series of videos. And my aim here in attempting to describe some of it is simply to provide examples of the sort of material that is featured on the account. The Dark Tower series alone deserves its own focused exposition. Because despite currently being one of the most recognized authors in the world, Stephen King's work is vastly underappreciated because most people are completely oblivious to its hidden dimensions. Seriously, there's nothing else quite like it in the modern canon. I consider not including this because I don't want to sound paranoid. But my suspension from X came as a surprise because I was briefly under the impression that Elon Musk himself might have been paying attention to my account. He has never engaged with me directly or reshared one of my posts, but he seemed to occasionally respond to what I was doing in a manner that is consistent with the subject of the material, which is of course symbolic pattern recognition and nonverbal communication. Shortly before I was banned, I made a reply on one of Stephen King's posts that compared the cover of Under the Dome to one of the illustrations that is featured in this video. And the very next day I was confronted with a post from Musk at the top of my feed that contained similar imagery. I don't know if this is a coincidence or what, but this has happened before. On December 30th of 2025, he shared a video that seems to reference an upload that I made about a year earlier. In case you are wondering, Lord Jacob's donkey is a reference to Jacob Rothschild, who was a deeply religious man that appears to have been hopeful that someone would eventually come along and work this very problem. If this is indeed more than mere coincidence, then it is very possible that I have intruded upon the domain of the obscenely wealthy by studying this material. And I am presently unsure of how to feel about this.